It was one of those days when everything seemed to go wrong. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the quiet highway. But for the struggling family, stranded on the side of the road, it didn't bring any comfort. The father stood outside, the old, worn-down car, staring at the smoking engine with a helpless expression. His wife sat in the passenger seat, trying to keep their two young kids calm as they fidgeted restlessly in the back. They had already been waiting for hours, and every passing car felt like another reminder that no one was stopping to help. Then, just when they had given up hope, a man pulled over. He was an ordinary guy, jeans, a t-shirt, a truck that had clearly seen better days. But to this family, he might as well have been a guardian angel. He walked over with a friendly smile, his hands resting on his hips. "Car trouble?" he asked, even though it was obvious. The father sighed. "Yeah, it just died on us. We don't have the money to tow it, and I don't know much about fixing cars." The man nodded, rolling up his sleeves. "Let me take a look." He wasn't a mechanic, not professionally, but he had spent enough years under the hood of his own vehicles to know his way around an engine. As he worked, the father stood beside him, watching closely, asking questions. The kids peeked out the window, their curiosity momentarily distracting them from their hunger and exhaustion. The mother, quiet but grateful, kept glancing at the stranger with cautious hope. After an hour of work, the man finally straightened up, wiping grease off his hands. "Try starting it now," he said. The father slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Relief flooded his face, and his wife let out a shaky laugh. The kids cheered from the back seat. "I don't know how to thank you," the father said, stepping out to shake the man's hand. "Don't worry about it," the man replied. "Just pay it forward when you can." They exchanged names, just first names, nothing too personal, and after a final wave, the man climbed into his truck and drove off, disappearing into the evening light. He didn't think much about it afterward. To him, it was just a small act of kindness, something he hoped someone would do for him if he were ever in the same situation. But what he didn't know was that this simple moment would change his life forever. Days passed, then weeks. The memory of that roadside encounter had started to fade when something unexpected happened. A letter arrived in his mailbox, an actual handwritten letter, which was rare enough to catch his attention. The envelope was thick, the kind that held more than just a single sheet of paper. There was no return address, just his name carefully written across the front. Curious, he tore it open and pulled out the pages inside. His eyes scanned the words, and with each sentence, his heart pounded harder. By the time he reached the end, his hands were shaking. He read the final line again, just to make sure he wasn't imagining things. The letter was offering him something unbelievable, something that could change everything. But who had sent it? And why? The man sat at his kitchen table, the letter still trembling in his hands. His heart pounded as he read it over and over again, making sure he wasn't misunderstanding anything. The words on the page felt too surreal, like something out of a dream. The letter wasn't just a thank you note. It was something far bigger than he ever could have expected. It started with a simple message. "You don't know how much that night meant to us. You didn't just fix our car. You gave us hope when we had none. I didn't tell you everything back then, but we were at the lowest point of our lives. That night changed everything for us. And now we want to change everything for you." The man's brow furrowed as he continued reading. The letter explained that the family he had helped was going through more than just car trouble. They had lost nearly everything: a home, steady jobs, even their sense of security. The breakdown that night had been the last thing they could handle. One final push toward despair. But then, a stranger had stopped. A stranger who expected nothing in return, who asked for nothing but a promise to pay it forward someday. That moment had stayed with them. It had sparked something inside them, something they had nearly lost, faith in the kindness of others. As he turned to the next page, his breath caught in his throat. The letter went on to say that after that night, things had begun to change for the family. The father had finally gotten a job offer, one he had been desperately waiting for. It wasn't much at first, but it was enough to get them back on their feet. They had slowly begun to rebuild their lives, piece by piece. And now, months later, they were in a position to give something back. The man's eyes darted to the final lines of the letter, the part that made his hands shake. "We want to help you now. We have an opportunity that we believe could change your life, just like you changed ours. If you're willing, we'd love to meet again, to talk, to explain everything in person. Please consider it." Attached to the letter was a phone number, a name, a request. The man leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He hadn't expected anything like this. He had barely even thought about that night since it happened. To him, it had been a simple act of kindness, nothing more. But to them, it had meant everything. His mind raced with questions. What kind of opportunity were they talking about? What could they possibly offer him? And should he even call? He had never been the type to believe in fate or destiny, but something about this felt different. It felt important. After a long moment, he reached for his phone. His fingers hesitated over the buttons. But then, with a deep breath, he dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. "Hello?" It was the father. His tone was warm, but there was something else there too. A hint of anticipation, maybe even excitement. "Hey," the man said slowly. "It's me." There was a brief silence. Then the father exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath. "I was hoping you'd call," he said. They arranged to meet at a small cafe in town. The man arrived first, nervous but curious. He had no idea what to expect. When the family walked in, they looked different from the last time he had seen them. They were dressed better, standing taller, smiling in a way they hadn't that night. On the side of the road, they greeted him warmly, thanking him again for what he had done. The mother wiped away a tear as she spoke, saying that they had thought about him every day since that night. Then, the father got to the point. "I don't know what your situation is right now," he began carefully, "but I do know that good people like you deserve good things, and I think we might have something for you." The man leaned in, listening closely. The father explained that in the months since their car broke down, he had gotten a job working for a company owned by a close family friend. Not just any company, but a growing business that was actively looking for someone trustworthy, someone reliable. "They're looking for someone like you," the father said, "and I already put in a word for you. If you're interested, the job is yours." The man blinked in surprise. He hadn't even considered something like this. He had been working odd jobs, struggling to make ends meet, never quite sure what the next month would bring. And now, out of nowhere, this? He hesitated, feeling an overwhelming mix of emotions. It felt too sudden, too good to be true. But as he looked at the family sitting across from him, the genuine gratitude in their eyes, the hope, they weren't trying to trick him. They weren't asking for anything in return. They were just paying it forward. His heart pounded as he considered their offer. He could say yes, take a leap of faith, and see where this path led him. Or he could walk away, go back to his normal life, never knowing what might have been. The decision weighed heavily on him, and in that moment, he realized something. The night he had stopped to help them, he hadn't thought twice about it. He had just done what felt right. Maybe now it was time for him to let someone help him. He took a deep breath, looked at the family, and opened his mouth to give them his answer. The man took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He looked at the family sitting across from him, their faces full of anticipation and hope. They weren't offering charity. They weren't asking for anything in return. They were simply giving him the same thing he had given them, that night on the side of the road, a chance. A part of him wanted to say no, to brush it off, to convince himself that he didn't deserve something this good. But then he thought about where he was in life, the bills stacking up, the constant uncertainty of what came next, the feeling that no matter how hard he worked, he was always just barely getting by. And then he thought about that night, how, without hesitation, he had stopped to help them when no one else had. Maybe, just maybe, this was his moment to be helped. With a slow nod, he finally spoke. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." Relief washed over the father's face. The mother clasped her hands together, smiling. The kids, even though they didn't fully understand, seemed to pick up on the excitement in the air. "That's great," the father said. "You won't regret it." Over the next few weeks, everything moved faster than the man expected. He met with the company's owner, a kind, no-nonsense man who valued hard work and integrity. The interview wasn't much of an interview at all. The father had already vouched for him, and that was enough. "You helped my friend when you had no reason to," the owner said. "That tells me more about your character than any resume ever could." And just like that, he had a steady job, a real job, something that offered stability, security, and a future. At first, it felt unreal. He kept waiting for something to go wrong, for the opportunity to slip through his fingers. But it didn't. Day by day, he settled into his new role, learning, growing, and proving to himself that he belonged there. And with that, his life began to change. He was able to pay his bills on time. He could finally save a little, instead of constantly worrying about making ends meet. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward instead of just surviving. But what stayed with him the most wasn't just the job. It was the lesson behind it all. That one small act of kindness, stopping to help a family in need, had set off a chain of events he never could have imagined. It reminded him that the good we put into the world doesn't just disappear. It comes back, often in ways we least expect. One evening, months later, he found himself driving down a familiar stretch of road. The sun was setting, casting that same golden glow over the highway. Up ahead, he saw a car pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. A figure stood beside it, looking frustrated, helpless. The man smiled to himself, pulling over without a second thought. As he stepped out of his truck and walked toward the stranded driver, he realized something. This was how it all began. And maybe, just maybe, it was about to begin again.